means. I don't think the monkeys have a sense of fairness like you and I have, but I do think they have a sense of, hold on, you're getting more than I am. I can't let this happen. Otherwise, I'm screwed. And there's lots of great evidence that if you let that happen, you're screwed.
But do the females have that same sense of competitiveness that they need to have the exact same thing those other bitches are having? Do they get angry?
Well, here's the thing. It depends on whether your mating system is going to be pair bonding or not. So if you're a frog or lots of different frogs, not all of them, a laughing tree frog, or if you're a elephant seal or something, well, all the females mate with the best male, because his job is just sex. And so every female can have the best one, or either in a situation where they got no choice, like the elephant seals, he controls the rookery, or in a situation where they just listen to all the croaking and then they go, all right, you're the best croaker, you're the dad. But if you're pair bonding like humans or like lots of other animals, birds, etc., then what you need is you've got competition on both sides. So she's always competing to get the best male, and he's always competing to get the best female. Now, there's reasons why male-male competition is always a bit more intense than female-female competition, but both of them are there. And the more monogamous the system gets, the more both sides compete for each other.
Interesting. So what about in the case of like bonobos, where they're so polyamorous?
Bonobos are super interesting systems. So you've got lots of polyamorous animals. Bonobos are interesting. Chimps are also, so if you look at one of the great ways to look at our ancestors and what their lives were like is you look in your trousers. And the size of your testicles tells you a lot about what sort of mating system your ancestors had. So gorillas have tiny little testicles. And the reason that they have such tiny testicles is they use their huge body to drive away the other males, and then all the females are in his harem. So he doesn't need big testicles because he only needs enough sperm in order to inseminate the females he's got. It doesn't take much sperm to inseminate any one female, and testicles are really expensive tissue to make. And if you own a pair and you land on them, you know they're uncomfortable too, right? And so then you look at our testicles, and they're quite a bit bigger than a gorilla's, but they're nowhere near the size of a chimp or a bonobo, both. They're basically, in many ways, almost the same beast. And so, although socially quite different. And they have a system where they basically have to wash out the guy who was there before them. And so it takes really big testicles to have sperm competition. So their competition isn't by fighting each other, although there's a degree of that too. They know full well that when she comes into estrus, into heat, there's going to be a line. And if you're fifth in line and you can wash everybody out before you might end up the dad.
Wash everybody out is a funny way of putting it.
Yeah, so it's not very romantic.
This testicle size is directly proportionate to the number of promiscuous females.
Well, that's right. The promiscuity of the mating system.
Yes.
And so if you look at our mating system, we clearly evolved to be largely monogamous, but not entirely. Our testicles are unnecessarily large for an entirely monogamous species. And so we're a little bit on the wash the guy out ahead of us domain.
But there's many people that make arguments that our monogamy is socially reinforced and it's not natural.
Look, if you look at hunter-gatherers, and so the best way that we get a sense of, well, what did we evolve to do is to look at the remaining hunter-gatherer societies, particularly if you look at what are called immediate return hunter-gatherers. So they're people who eat today what they killed today. Now, you've got a lot of hunter-gatherers. Once they left the equator, they could store food, and everything changed for them. And they actually, in many of their behaviors, they look a lot like us. And we can come back to that if you like. But if you look at hunter-gatherers around the equator, they're typically immediate return, kill, eat. And so those guys tend to be, there's always, of course, human differences. We're a super variable species, but they tend to be serially monogamous. And so some people pair up for life. Lots of people pair up for 5-7 years and then break apart and pair up again. And so you have a sequence of children with a sequence of people.
Right.
But largely monogamous, not entirely. And in fact,
monogamous during those time periods.
Yeah, largely. Yeah. Now we know every single animal we've ever described as monogamous, when we do the DNA, we now find they're not entirely. But they're mostly.
Interesting. So have you ever read Sex at Dawn? What did you think of that?
No offense, but I think it's total crap.
Oh, Chris Ryan, do you hear that shit? Everybody's rocking on your book, bro. What did you think is crap about it?
I just don't think the system works that way.
But explain to people that may not know what we're talking about.
I haven't read that book now since it came out. So let me remind me the thesis. Do you remember it offhand?
The idea is that we evolved in these small tribes of people that essentially shared sexual partners.
Oh yeah, that's bullshit. And so the thing is that...
What makes you say that so confidently?
Well, I don't know. I shouldn't say it quite so confidently. You're absolutely right. I believe that's bullshit. How's that?
Okay. Why do you believe that's bullshit?
Because, so human beings have very clear evolved jealousy systems, and they're not just a product of the world that we live in today. You can see jealousy among hunter-gatherers as well. Now, the thing is, they get jealous about different things because, of course, men and women have slightly different pressure on them, but they both get jealous by infidelity. Now, that's not to say that the book is incorrect about some societies and some places, because one of the interesting things about humans is our flexibility. And so you can create a system, and some hunter-gatherers have, where there's a lot of that, a ton of that.
Right.
There's some really interesting ones where literally once the woman gets pregnant, she then starts to sleep with all the other males because she thinks her baby will gain the qualities of all the men that she sleeps with. So I'm not trying to claim that we're always monogamous, because absolutely that's untrue.
Right.
But I do think that the dominant system is one of serial monogamy. And the reason I think that that's the dominant system is this is kind of the deal that we made, whereby the males go out and do the hunting, the females go out and do gathering, and that's basically universal. She tends to cook for him, and that comes back to the fire point you made, which we can come back to. And so they share resources, and he's happy to share resources and do his best to kind of sort of look out for her kids. I mean, human males we don't take as much care as human females do of our kids, but we're much better than the other great apes. And so that level of investment he's going to make tends to be to the degree that he believes that he's the father of the kids. Now, you have societies where he doesn't know, that really all are polyamorous like that, by all means. I don't know what percentage they are, and it could even be they're more common than I believe. But when that happens, the systems tend to change a little bit, and he's a little bit less willing to look out, try to help out kids, other than to do her a favor, unless the kid looks a lot like himself.
Now, what about why having a system, a biological system, where jealousy comes up? What makes you think that somehow or another negates the idea of polyamorous relationships?
Well, it does suggest that they're not our default, because
Doesn't it more likely suggest that it encourages competition, which is just natural?
Well, no, now you think about envy instead of jealousy. And so if I'm jealous, I'm upset that my wife slept with somebody else last night. Mm-hmm. He could be a lowlife. I don't envy a thing about him. I don't want anything he owns. But I'm jealous of her behavior. I'm protective of what she's done. And so there's a wonderful experiment David Buss has run at the University of Texas.
Can I stop you there, though?
Yeah, of
Aren't
course.
you jealous of the man as well? You're not just jealous of her behavior. You're jealous of this other male that gets to have sex with your wife. And couldn't that possibly encourage competition and encourage men to be more aggressive or more ingenious, or just encourage creativity, encourage better hunting skills so you attract more women? I mean, all those things seem to be
I would agree
natural.
with all. Yeah, I would agree with all that, but I'd phrase it a little bit differently. So
Okay.
there's this wonderful study out of the Philippines where they measured huge number of men's testosterone when they were single. Mm-hmm. And then they waited a few years and measured it again after they were still single, or now they're married, and they have kids. Mm-hmm. Okay? And I'm sure it wasn't a psychology study, because we can't afford to do that. It was probably some medical thing. But they used it to answer this interesting psychological question, which who's most likely to get the girl by their original testosterone levels, and what happens when you do? Well, the guys who got married in the intervening few years had higher testosterone than the guys who didn't. So yeah, you're absolutely right. We're out there competing with other males in order to get the girl. And there's lots and lots that goes on there, tons of really interesting things. But what's interesting is once we get the girl, our testosterone drops. And so once we partner up, and if we're in a monogamous relationship, not polyamorous, but in a monogamous relationship, our testosterone drops, and then it drops again if we have kids. And testosterone is a great hormone for getting out there and being competitive with other guys. It's not a great hormone for being nurturant for your children, and it's not a great hormone for being faithful to your partner. And so I think that we evolved to compete with other males in order to get into the mating game. So if you look at our ancestral DNA, you know how you can track our male and female ancestry through mitochondrial DNA on the mother's side and Y? You'll see that we have far more female ancestors than male. Not quite 2-to-1, but I think it's close to that. And so what does that tell us? Well, lots of guys are getting left out of the mating game entirely, and lots of guys are inseminating lots of different women. So all those things that you said are absolutely true. And all that pushes us for competition. But part of what I believe goes on is part of that competition that we engaged in was in order to get the girl to get into that relationship in the first place.
Could I stop you there? Because
Sure.
I think that if you're going to have a study on testosterone, and you have to have a study on lifestyle. I mean, if you get married and you have children, one of the things that happens is you become less active. You don't exercise as much. You don't sleep as much. All those things have a pretty radical effect on hormone production.
Absolutely. And it could well be that, you always have to have a proximal mechanism whereby evolution plays its game, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the distal cause is, as an evolved species, testosterone is super important to get us into the mating game, but it's less useful once we're in it. Well, all you have to do is have a system whereby those things tend to downregulate testosterone, exactly like you said, because those things are going to happen once you get partnered up. And so, but mind you, when our ancestors partnered up, they're still out hunting every day. We may be
right, but we don't have studies on them.
We don't.
But
unfortunately, we don't.
The issue is that I'm having with this is we have studies on the general health and testosterone and hormonal health of sedentary humans.
Yeah.
I mean, I would like to know what their lifestyle is. I would like to know what they're doing.
Yeah. And
So
I'm
this
sure you're
doesn't
right.
seem to make any sense to me, because one thing that everybody knows is that you get dad bod. Right?
Yeah.
That's dad bod. What is dad bod? Dad bod is a guy who works all day, comes home, sits on the couch, probably eats food he probably shouldn't eat, hangs out with his kids, doesn't get a whole lot of exercise, works, probably doesn't sleep as much as he should. To me, that's a symptom of poor health and fitness.
Right, and it's not a symptom our ancestors ever experienced.
Right, but
because
it's not. This is not necessarily an indication of any sort of evolutionary benefit of having low testosterone, because we've demonstrated for sure that when people don't get sleep and when they don't get exercise, their testosterone drops. Well, those are two things that absolutely happen when you get married and have children.
Right, and the only thing I would say is the time span of this study was only over a few years.
But that's even worse. The thing about having this kind of a study and making these kind of conclusions based on, I mean, we know these mechanisms are in place. We already know that there's natural effects of sedentary lifestyle, lack of sleep, and the effects are your hormone production drops, your body suffers, you become less healthy, and this is not indicating monogamy. This is just indicating poor health. This is not like an evolutionary advantage to having low testosterone because it helps you raise children. You can have high testosterone and still be a good dad and raise children and still have empathy. And
of course,
be a
all
good
these
partner.
things are bell curves, right?
Yeah,
the higher
but
T you are, the harder it gets.
But
I would say
the problem I'm having is drawing conclusions on this one study and stating them as if they're facts.
No, you're absolutely right. If I say it's a fact, it's certainly overstated, because we only know the problem with almost all of our studies is the exact one you point out. We've got them on us, right?
Right.
We don't have, and so like the sex studies are a perfect example. Like things like female orgasm, what role does it play? Well, you need really good data on hunter-gatherers to know the answer to that question. If you look at hunter-gatherers, they don't have dad bod, right? They're all lean, and whether they're fathers or not, because they're out there hunting every day or gathering every day.
Very physically active.
Yeah. So if I oversold that, my apologies, because you're absolutely right. I suspect, though, that you'd find the same thing. I don't know it. It's all we got right now.
Yeah, but how can you suspect it? I mean, there's no data.
Yeah, there is no data.
It's just, when you look at these guys, I have a friend of mine who he was it, how do you say the name? The Yanomami in Bolivia?
Well, they're in Venezuela, Brazil.
Yeah, and he spent some time with them, and you see these people and the lifestyle they live. They're all barefoot, wandering through the jungle. They have these crazy-looking feet where their toes splay out because they're just constantly gripping the floor with their toes. I mean, they probably could choke you with their feet, you know?
Yeah.
And these people just look so fit and healthy in their 50s and 60s and 70s, and they have their shirt off and they're ripped.
Yeah, they're super fit. Same holds if you look at the Hadza in Tanzania, any of these groups. The Yanomama are interesting because they're hunter horticulturalists, so they're actually doing a little bit of gardening as well. But they're ripped and strong, and they don't have obesity problems.
Yeah.
And so all I would say is that the same thing holds. The one thing that we found in humans in our modern culture where we have these data is if you're married and have kids, but you're still looking around, your T hasn't gone down as much. Now, you're going to point out quite rightly that, well, maybe that's a different kind of person than the person who marries and isn't looking around. And so it's all confounded. It's super hard to do experiments on these things.
Yeah.
And we'll be a lot better off when we've got, we're losing the world's last hunter-gatherers are disappearing.
Yeah.
And it's not easy to collect these kind of data, but they're doing lots of genetic work with these people right now, all over Africa, because we've got tons of genetic data now on European descent and East Asian descent, but almost none on Africans, and so that's a huge project underway. And so, for all I know, they're working on hormones and other things as well.
Yeah, the reason why I'm asking about this is you were so readily dismissing. You were so willing to dismiss
The Sex at Dawn
book.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the facts that are laid out as facts in the book don't really hold up. And I wish I'd read it more recently, and so I could go through the details with you. There's some really good reviews by anthropologists and by people who work in, sexual studies and stuff like that, going through the details. We read it we have this evolutionary Center for Psychology and Evolution, and we read it and went through it, and we weren't convinced. I'm embarrassed to admit I can't remember the details of it
Chris
anymore.
is a very smart guy, and he's a good friend of mine.
It's also a great book.
It is a great book. I would love to see him debate one of those folks. I'm sure he probably has.
He probably has. And look, I know that all these things that we're talking about are heavily debated, right?
Yes.
So my colleague Rob Brooks is a wonderful evolutionary biologist in Australia, loves that book. So the fact that I think it's bullshit is obviously one person's opinion, where I dismiss that argument. Other people might say, well, look, there's a lot of cultures that do have much more, like the system I told you about, where they have sex with lots of men after they have their baby.
Right.
Humans are so flexible. We can do all those things. We just change the nature of how we do things. The social leap that I'm arguing about is not this pair bonding thing. It's about how our groups came together to engage in collective action. So in principle, I'm agnostic on this issue. I just happen to disagree with that. I happen to feel like, no, I think we made these deals. And so to come back to that study that David Buss did that I was starting to tell you about. So Buss has this, when he came along, people thought that the two sexes had similar levels of jealousy for infidelity. And David was like, well, look, insemination's internal. And so men should be a lot more worried about her sleeping with somebody else than women should be, because men never know for sure if they're the father. They can't see it happen. Whereas, if you're a salmon, you can say, okay, I'm the dad. I just watched that. But females, insemination's internal, but they know they're the mother. That's not their concern. They should be more concerned about things like his giving her resources to help her raise the kid and things like that. And so what Buss found is if you ask people this question, what would bother you more? Imagine your wife having sex with somebody that she just met for the first time, having this great time and doing all these different funky things with them, and then never doing it again. Or your wife develops this, ongoing emotional connection with somebody. She never touches him, he never touches her, but they talk and share their feelings and stare deep in each other's eyes. What would bother you more? And you ask men and women that question. So in your case, what would bother you more? To have your wife, to know she had this one-off affair, fling, sex only, didn't care about the guy, or she develops this sort of emotional bond with somebody, never touches him?
That's a good question. I'd really have to think about that.
It's not an easy one because nobody likes either of them.
No. Yeah, because it's a matter of time before that dude gets in. That's a fox
it's a guarantee.
Chicken coop.
I know, but in this case, it's a guarantee, right?
It's a guarantee that they never
touch. Never touch.
As long as he doesn't talk shit about me. That's the problem. Those guys, they have the
Try
poison
to wedge
tongue.
you away, right?
Yeah, they said, well, I would do so much better. This guy he doesn't treat you right.
Right. Well, here's the thing.
Weasels.
On average, men are more bothered by sex, the one-off sex, and women are more bothered by the emotional connection because that's a bigger threat.
Emotional connection could lead to him leaving her.
Well, also, if it's him leaving her, directing his resources elsewhere, and so
exactly.
So it's mind you, every time we talk about gender differences, it's super important to keep in mind they're heavily overlapping bell curves.
Right.
So it's never 100% this way, and except like, do you have this organ or something?
Right.
But psychologically, it's always overlapping. But this is a big effect. Men on average are much more bothered by the one-off sex, and women on average are much more bothered by the emotional connection.
Yeah, that's fascinating because I was reading something about inappropriate emotional relationships that people have at work, and that this is an issue with people that work together. They develop these, office friendships that lead to inappropriate emotional relationships. And I was like, whoa, this is I've never worked in an office, so I'm listening to this, or reading this rather, and I'm like, what a strange world that is. Like, I get it though. I get it. Like, if there's a guy and he's married and a gal and she's married, but they meet at work and they stare in each other's eyes all day and they go to lunch and maybe they even hold hands every now and then.
Well, they become...
That's where it crosses the line. Like, you're allowed to hug people when you hold hands. That's intense. That's skin to skin.
It
That's
is
serious.
It's going to concern you if you're a partner.
Yeah.
But what's also going to concern you is the mere fact that you see this kind of thing, this deep conversation happening and all that. Because think about it. If we evolved to basically partner up for a while, then there's always going to be the chance that that next
Right.
person along is going to be the one who wedges yours away.
Serial monogamy.
And both males and females gain from not putting all their eggs into the same genetic basket. So if my wife partners up with you for a while, she'll get a certain kind of offspring, and then maybe that'll be a great thing. But maybe when the situation changes, or the in tomorrow's world, some smaller, wimpier guy would be handy in some way, and so maybe she's better off partnering with me next.
Interesting. Yeah, it is fascinating when you break it down that it really does become, there's a biological reason for these behaviors and these the motivation for the jealousy and all these things, that there's a history, a biological history to all this stuff.
And we don't know what hunter-gatherers, how they would answer that question.
Right.
So we're only just assuming that the answer
Right.
we're providing is general. But for me, those kinds of things suggest that we evolved in a lot of long-term monogamous circumstances that may have been serial, and there was certainly fooling around. But if we were polyamorous, like the book says, we'd have bigger balls.
Our balls are so big, though.
Compared to a chimp, they're small.
Yeah, but chimps are, I mean, everything's big with them.
Well, no, our penis
they
is
have
way
large-
bigger than theirs.
Right,
They
but
got
they
a
have-
tiny little...
They have large balls, smaller penises, but penises are probably getting in the way, right?
Well, no, here's the thing about, so human beings copulate for an extraordinarily long period of time. And we also have this cryptic ovulation, where she's not showing you that she's in heat. So male chimps aren't interested unless she has that enormous swelling on her vagina. And then they're like, oh, that's super attractive to me.
Oh, I see. So, but what about bonobos? Because they
do this
copulate
funky
for
sex thing all the time, right?
Yeah, they have fun, right?
Yeah, they're all sorts of funky, orgiastic kinds of things. When I taught at Ohio State University, the zoo there has a great bonobo exhibit, and you bring your kids through, and there's a serious orgy going on, and the kids are like, "Hey, mom," she's like,
Yeah, there's a lot of zoos that won't have bonobos because of that, right?
Yeah, they're pretty interesting. And so the thing is that those kinds of things just show you that it's complicated, right? Any kind of straightforward answer that
Right.
it's going to have some
Any
wrinkles
absolutes.
in it. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and I apologize if I gave some earlier.
No worries.
So anyway, but back to this issue. So if we had a total bonobo chimp kind of system, I don't think we'd evolve those systems of jealousy, because what's to be gained by that? We're not making these long-term partners. Why would you get these differences?
Again, whenever I bring Chris's book up, and I have to defend it because this happened a couple times over the last year, I haven't read it in at least 2 years. I'd have to go back and
I read
go
it
back over
probably
it.
5 years ago,
But
so when it came out.
When my friend's wife got a hold of it, my friend got it, and my friend's wife got a hold of it, and she threw it right in the trash. She read like a paragraph or two, and she's like, "Fuck this book."
Yeah, a lot of women react that way, and I can't remember why.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I just don't have it loaded up.
Whatever.